My name is Annie Rogers, and on behalf of the Attitude team, I'm so pleased to welcome you to today's ADHD Experts presentation titled Helping Lonely Teenagers with ADHD, Parent-Teacher Strategies for Combating Peer Rejection. If your child has ADHD, I don't need to tell you that hallmark symptoms like inattention and impulsivity might get in the way of relationships with peers and with school staff. Today's webinar, we will explore how ADHD can affect a student's behavior in the classroom, plus how to avoid or reduce behaviors that can lead to peer rejection. We'll share strategies that parents, teachers, and teens can use to save a student's reputation and ultimately feel less alone. Leading today's presentation is Brendan Mahan. Brendan is an internationally recognized ADHD and executive function coach, a highly engaging, sought-after speaker, and the host of the ADHD Essentials podcast. A former teacher, mental health counselor, and principal, Brendan helps individuals, families, schools, and businesses manage the challenges of ADHD and neurodiversity through an approach that blends education, collaborative problem solving, and accountability with compassion, humor, a focus on strengths and growth, and his trademark wall of awful model. Before I hand over the microphone to Brendan, I have just a couple of housekeeping items. Those of you tuned into the live webinar can submit your questions at any time. Just navigate to the text box under the video player. To download the slides, click on the Event Resources section of your webinar screen. And if you're interested in the certificate of attendance, just look for instructions in an email you will receive about an hour after the live broadcast. Also, a transcript of today's event will be made available in the coming week. If you are listening in replay or podcast mode, visit attitudemag.com and search podcast 429 to access the slides, webinar replay, and certificate of attendance, as well as the transcript. If you support the work we're doing here at Attitude to strengthen the ADHD community, we encourage you to visit attitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for Attitude Magazine. It is a wonderful holiday gift. Finally, the sponsor of this webinar is Brain Balance. Brain Balance is an integrative cognitive development program designed to help kids, teens, and adults with ADHD, learning differences, anxiety, and beyond improve focus, attention, and behavior. Brain Balance creates a customized plan based on your child's needs to support their social, emotional, and academic growth. An exploratory study with Harvard's McLean Hospital found that Brain Balance programmed to be as effective as low-dose stimulant medication in alleviating ADHD symptoms in children. Click the link on the screen or visit brainbalance.com to learn more about Brain Balance today. Attitude thanks our sponsors for supporting our webinars. Sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. So without any further ado, I'm so pleased to welcome Brendan. Thank you so much for joining us today and for leading this discussion.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's always an honor to be invited to come and work with Attitude. So I'm glad to be here. As has already been said, my name is Brendan Mahan. I'm an ADHD coach, consultant, speaker, person, one of those guys. And we're going to talk about how to help teens navigate sort of social stuff, reputations, friendships, those kinds of things. My background is in education. So I've been in the high schools and the middle schools when kids are struggling with these things, and the elementary schools too, for that matter. So this is coming as much from experience as from sort of like study and knowledge and that kind of stuff. When it comes to everything we're going to talk about, I want to start with some assumptions before we jump into like the more content-based things. The three of them, in fact. The first assumption I want to have is that everyone is doing the best that they can. That's your kids, that's you as a parent, that's you as a teacher, that's your kids' teachers. And it's also the other kids, the ones that are not hanging out with your kid, and maybe even the ones that are shunning your kid. everyone is doing the best that they can based on the skills and knowledges that they have right now and the resources they have right now. Also, everybody wants to do well, right? So we want to meet with success. And finally, everybody wants to feel connected to the people around them, including your kid who maybe is acting like they don't really care if they have friends or don't care if people like them or anything like that. They still want to feel connected. So what do we do when these assumptions don't seem true? What does that mean? What do we do with that? First, lazy is not the answer. And they don't care is not the answer. I don't want us to go there, because when we start saying, oh, the kid's just lazy, or, oh, my son doesn't care, my daughter doesn't care, my student doesn't care, is lazy, whatever, we stop looking. We stop trying to figure out what the answer is, because we gave this sort of platitude, easy solution that lets us off the hook. We can't let ourselves off the hook because we're talking about kids. Even teenagers, we're still talking about kids who need the help and support of their parents and of the school staff and the teachers and the adults in their life. So I want to look deeper, and I want to wonder if they're not lazy, and if we assume that they care and they want to do well and they're trying their best and they want to be included and connected to their peers, then what's going on? Probably one of three things, maybe two of three things, maybe all three of these things. And they're, of course, pretty broad. There's probably some skills that are lagging, right? They just lack some skills, or the skills are not developing as quickly as we would expect. We know ADHD is a developmental disorder, so of course there's going to be some lagging skills. The kid also might lack some resources. Those resources could be technology. Those resources could be money to engage in activities that they would otherwise engage in. And often that means the family is potentially lacking those resources as well. And those resources could be people, right? It could be that the kid is not tapping into resources that they have because maybe they don't have the self-advocacy skills that they need, or maybe they don't know that those resources are even available to them. You'd be surprised how many kids don't realize they can go talk to a guidance counselor kind of whenever they want, that is a resource for them. It's important that we let them know what those resources are so they can access them. And then finally, there's always the chance that there's some trauma going on here, right? And that might be trauma that mom and dad know about. It might be trauma that teachers know about. It might be trauma that the kid is not shared. So if there's been some bullying that's gone on, I could see a kid not wanting to make friends or not wanting to work too hard to make friends if they've been getting bullied and harassed by their peers since elementary school. That could be playing a role here as well. So when we put down the easy answers and start looking for what's below them, the answers get harder. They get harder to navigate. They get harder to understand. They get harder to support the kid in getting past. But that's really where the value lies. And we just, as adults, we have to be able to handle these more difficult conversations and these more difficult answers. I'm sure that some of you listening to me, when I drop the word trauma, some of you were like, I don't want my kid to have experienced any trauma. That can't be the answer. Yeah, but just because we don't want our kids to have experienced trauma doesn't mean that they haven't, right? And quick little word to the wise, all of them have. Just being alive can bring that up. And I don't know about you, but I've been living through a worldwide trauma event in the form of a global pandemic for like 3 years now. It was a lot worse a little while ago, but it's been a big deal. I know it's affected me. I know it's affected my kids, and I suspect it probably has affected you and your kids as well. And we don't want to disregard that, because 2 or 3 years in the life of a kid is much bigger than 2 or 3 years in the life of an adult. And those experiences were happening while they were developing, and that's going to affect their development. Lots and lots of kids are much more anxious than they were. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a school nurse on Sunday, and she was saying, yeah, there's kids coming to me all the time because someone sneezed or they had a cough and they're afraid of, do they have COVID? Does someone in their class have COVID? She has to kind of coach them through it. It's real. It's going on. So I don't want to gloss that over. And also, part of the early response to COVID was that a lot of us isolated ourselves. A lot of us sort of either stuck at home or had maybe a cohort of people we hung out with. That's going to affect kids' comfort level with reaching out and trying to connect with new people because they spent a year or maybe even longer actively being told that we don't want to reach out and contact other people. That had an effect. So I want to make sure we have that in here. So how does ADHD affect school behavior? First, the hyperactivity and inattention that go along with ADHD often lead to unexpected behaviors in school. And those unexpected behaviors can affect their reputations with both peers and with the school staff. So the hyperactive student might impulsively grab something off of a teacher's desk. They might behave aggressively toward a fellow student. They might engage in unexpected risky behavior, right? Like at gym class or something, all of a sudden they're climbing up a wall when they're not supposed to be. And that's surprising to the gym teacher. It's surprising to their classmates. They get in trouble, probably. They at least get corrected. And now the class is like, oh man, there's that kid that climbed the wall when he wasn't supposed to. I thought the gym teacher was going to kill him, right? And we start having the rumor mill go. The inattentive kid is still engaging in unexpected behaviors. They're just a little bit different, right? Like they might misplace materials that they need. And as a result, they have to borrow them from classmates. They might misunderstand things. And that could be embarrassing because they don't know what exactly they're supposed to be doing. And chances are they just don't know what they're supposed to be doing, right? Like, what page are we on again? What am I supposed to be doing? And that is going to lead to unexpected behavior and maybe annoy their peers or the kid who sits next to them or their science group or whatever the case may be. Those are often little things, but they can build up over time. When we have unexpected behavior, and I'm using that term on purpose because it isn't misbehavior, it's just behavior that we don't expect. When we have unexpected behavior, it surprises the people around us, right? Like, what is that person doing? And that surprise can be difficult to navigate for the kids who see it. And that's really where this peer rejection starts, is because the kids who see our neurodiverse child do something neurodiverse, they don't know what to do with that because they're not allowed to do that. And how come this kid's getting away with it? Or that's really surprising and makes me feel uncomfortable. And so I think that kid probably makes me feel uncomfortable. And now I don't really want to hang out with that kid or sit next to that kid or whatever. This is where the peer rejection starts to happen. And it happens with teachers too, right? Sometimes teachers get a little standoffish with those kids. And it happens adult to adult. And anyone who is watching this video that is a neurodiverse adult, I'm sure you've done something with your friends or at the mall or at work that was, a little bit wacky and a little unexpected. And you feel it. You feel that like, oh man, I did it wrong, right? Yesterday, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but yesterday was Halloween. I wish someone a Merry Christmas because my brain just misfired, right? I just said the wrong thing. And they looked at me like, huh? And then my wife kind of chuckled about it as we walked back into the house. Unexpected, really small, not a big deal. I'm probably never going to see those people again because they were trick-or-treating. But my brain just went in the wrong direction because my brain is neurodiverse. I have ADHD. It just fired wrong. I'm okay with it. But I recognize that if I did that all the time, probably would affect my reputation. So what can we do to help students reduce or avoid these kinds of unexpected negative behaviors, right? The first thing I want us to try is give them somebody to connect with that they can emulate. It does not have to be a peer. In fact, I usually caution against the peer part. Often what happens when, especially for teachers in school, is the neurodiverse kid gets paired with like the most normal kid in the class. They're like, this is the shining example of perfect behavior. You should model what Jenny is doing. It's almost always a girl. And they can't, like it's too far. There's too much of a gap between them and Jenny. And Jenny is like, oh, I'm stuck with that kid again, right? Or I'm stuck with a kid that needs this kind of support again. So I'm not one to say necessarily stick them with a peer. If you are going to stick them with a peer, for the teachers that are watching, find a peer that's like not a shining example of perfection and is sort of middle of the road. So the gap is a little bit smaller. But we can also pair them with a staff member, especially if they have a staff member that they're kind of already paired with a little bit. One of my kids has got some anxiety stuff going on at school, and I was like, he needs an adult to connect with, and they were trying to figure out like guidance counselor, teacher, right? I'm like, connect them to the librarian. The librarian and my kid already have a relationship because he takes books out all the time. Last year, he was allowed to take a book out after it was too late to take out books, like the last week of school. The librarian was like, I know you're going to bring it back. It's fine. You read fast. We're good. So there might be an adult in the school that they're already connected to. Find out who that is. I don't care if it's a custodian. Find out who it is and try to bring that relationship to another tier to help this kid have someone to emulate. And it can also be a celebrity or a fictional character, like from a movie or a book, right? Like, hey, what do you think Luke Skywalker would do in this situation? How would he navigate this? Be careful what character you pick, right? We don't want to pick like Jack Sparrow or someone who is, a little bit surprising and unexpected behavior with how they operate. We want to pick someone who's a little more boring. But pay attention to that as an option, because sometimes it's easier to take on the persona of a fictional character and do what you think they would do. Also, when we're bringing a kid into a new situation, we want to talk to them about what's expected in that situation, right? Because they might not know. Even a 16-year-old might have no idea what is expected of them in this situation. Talk to them about it. Make sure that they have an idea and review it, because they're going to forget. Even if it's something they've been doing for their whole school career, like, okay, cool, we're going to go work in groups. Review what the expectations are for working in groups, even if they're a junior in high school. And preferably review it with the whole class so that you're not shining a spotlight on the kids that struggle. You're just doing it as a, hey, by the way. And teachers, I would recommend you do this at the beginning of the school year and then after each break. So whenever you're gone for more than like 2 days, 3 days, you should be reviewing some of the basics of your expected behaviors. And if you're not doing group work regularly, every time you do group work, you should review what group work is supposed to look like so that the kids can do it appropriately. And most of you are probably doing that, but just in case, throwing it out there. Finally, use this kid's IEP or 504 as a guide to help understand where they might get tripped up. There's solutions in that 504, in that IEP, that can be used beyond academic applications. A 504 and an IEP is really a guide for how to communicate as much as how to teach, because teaching is just communication. So if we start to look at it in that lens, we can start to see how some of these accommodations might be more useful in situations outside of academics, right? If you're previewing new material, that circles back to what I just talked about, right? If we're going to be in a new situation, we want to preview that situation and talk about what it's going to be like. If the kid needs preferred seating when he works in the group, let's figure out what that preferred seating means and make sure they're getting it, even though they're working in a group and it might be a little bit looser with where people sit. So keep that stuff in mind. In terms of how parents can enlist a teacher's help, don't be afraid to talk to them, right? Ask the teachers about their impression of your teen and or your teen's reputation, because they might have two different things. They might be like, your teen is phenomenal. They're a great kid, but you wouldn't know that from their reputation. And that's information that a parent needs. So you might want to ask both questions and see if there's a gap there. Or they might be like, yeah, your student, I'm gonna be honest, kind of drives me bananas, but he's wicked funny and has a great reputation among his peers, even though, I kind of am annoyed with him most of the time. Most teachers have seen a lot of different kids over the years, and they're going to have some ideas for how to support yours because they've seen other kids make these same mistakes. They've seen these patterns before, and they probably can think of times when students broke the pattern and can clue you in onto what was done in those situations. But this is a double-edged sword, because some teachers are going to react really strongly to your kid's behavior in a negative way, because they've seen this pattern so much, and your kid is reminding them of past students, even though your kid is not their past student. So teacher temperament factors in here too, right? Like if it's a teacher that's really supportive and positive, cool, talk to them. If it's a teacher that seems like they maybe need to retire, you know, your mileage may vary, is all I'm saying. When it comes to improving your teen's reputation with teachers, so with the school staff, first talk to the teacher, find out where the conflict is. Resist their pushback. Because teachers are, especially once you have a teenager, the teachers are like, well, he should really be the one that should be talking to me. She needs to come to me and see what's up. Yeah, but I'm still their parent and they're not independent of me yet. So I have the right to talk to you. Help me understand. My kid needs guidance. And they have ADHD, so they're lagging behind developmentally. And that matters here. That's playing a role. Talk to them. And don't let them brush you off and try to make your kid do it instead. It doesn't mean your kid shouldn't, because probably they should. But if you need to like lay some groundwork before the kid comes in, that's okay. I often hear parents with ADHD or parents of ADHD kids worried about, am I a helicopter parent or a lawnmower parent or a snowplow parent or a weed whacker parent or whatever implement of like destruction you want to talk about? No, you're not. Parents of neurotypical kids can be helicopter parents and lawnmower parents and all that stuff. Parents of ADHD kids, parents of neurodiverse kids, our kids need us to do some of that work. And it's okay if we do it. Do we want to make sure we're like only doing as much as is necessary and not going beyond that? Yeah. Is that hard to judge? Yeah. Sometimes you're going to do too much. Sometimes you're not going to do enough. But you'll learn. Other things to improve a kid's reputation with their teachers. What are the expectations that your kid is failing to meet? Ask that question directly of the teacher or the principal or the guidance counselor or whatever, so that you know what those expectations are and how can we meet those expectations. And I don't just mean, well, they're not really writing their paragraphs with enough detail. That's an academic expectation. What about the social expectations? What about the unwritten curriculum, the hidden curriculum in school, in terms of how do they enter the classroom? How do they interact with their peers? How do they interact with you as a teacher? Are they doing this stuff right? What about their social skills? We want to find that stuff out. And then what does the teacher think might be the reason your kid is failing to meet those expectations? And if they say, well, he just doesn't do his homework, that is not what I mean. That's like the surface answer. Okay, cool. Why do you think he's not getting his homework done? Or why do you think it is that he's not getting along with his peers? What's happening? Not just the end result. Don't just name the problem. Start to try to explore what's hiding behind that problem. What are the lacking skills? What are the lacking resources? What's going on there? And then we can reframe a teacher's perspective according to our assumptions if we need to, right? So if the teacher is talking to us and you don't think that they're starting with everyone is doing the best they can, everybody wants to do well, and everyone wants to be connected to their peers, if they're not starting there, we need to start there. We need to say to them, well, let's assume he wants to be successful and he's trying his best. How does that affect your lens on this? If he's already trying the best he can, what does that mean? These are important questions to ask to reframe their assumptions, because they might not be making those assumptions. They might be making the assumption that like, well, this kid just doesn't care, or this kid like is totally uninvested in school. Okay, cool. Why? Why is my kid uninvested in school? And by the way, I know there's teachers listening and some of you are like, I never act like that. I know, because you're here, right? The teachers who make these kinds of assumptions don't come to these things on their own on their spare time. So I'm not aiming any of this stuff at you guys, any educators in the audience right now. Moving merrily along. Ways to improve your teen's rep with teachers. Leverage the 504 and the IEP. It's a guide to how to teach your kid. If it starts revealing stuff about their behavior and all of a sudden things make sense, we want to make sure the teacher's seeing that. And if it's not being followed, we want to address that with school staff. If there's accommodations that aren't working anymore, we want to know that. And we want to make those changes as necessary. And it's fully within your rights to make those changes. Also, make sure your kid is clear when it comes to improving the teen reputation with teachers. Make sure your kid is clear about what is expected of them and that they do what is expected of them, that they're doing what they need to do to meet those expectations. Help your kid communicate with the teacher to help them reset that relationship, right? That might mean they need to apologize to the teacher. It might mean you need to talk to the teacher first. It's incredibly hard for a kid to talk to a teacher and apologize to them, especially when it's one where the relationship is frayed, because the kid doesn't have any power in that relationship. The teacher does. This is the same for parents. Adults are the ones who have to open the door to make apologies possible. If the kid doesn't feel like they're going to ever be forgiven, they're not going to bother making that apology. So a parent might need to talk to a teacher about, I hear you that you need my kid to apologize to you, but he doesn't think you're going to forgive him. He doesn't think you care. So we need to navigate that so that he can go through the effort of apologizing to you, so he can feel like it's going to be something that'll turn into something. This is when parents talking to teachers directly is important. Even if they're a senior in high school, that power dynamic still exists. So how do we improve our teens' reputation with their peers? And let me circle back to that parent, to the improving their rep with the teachers. A lot of improving a kid's reputation with a teacher boils down to doing the work and getting the things turned in. That a lot of it boils down to that. So they just need to do the work. But resetting also matters. Improving your kid's reputation with their peers, your teens' reputation with their peers. Find out what their reputation is first, right? What are the areas that need to be addressed, and how are things going? We can do this by talking to their teachers, talking to their friends parents, and any adults who lead activities that they might be involved in, right? So the football coach, the troop leaders in Boy Scouts, the rock climbing coach, the martial arts instructor, the art teacher in the after-school program that they're a part of, whatever that may be. Find out. Even their boss at work, potentially. Do a little bit of digging. Then we want to determine what the real problems are and act accordingly. Because some of the stuff that is going to come up isn't going to really matter. It's not going to be a big deal. Yeah, okay, it annoys this one person, but no one else mentioned it, so I don't think it really matters. Or it is a thing that everyone mentioned, but it's really small and it's not that significant. There's bigger things to worry about. Also, can their reputation be salvaged, right? Is that a possibility? And if it is, cool. What do we have to do? Apologize, just get to work on time, stop gossiping, stop talking about Minecraft so much, whatever the case may be. Who might be willing to be an ally or an advocate for your kid? Those people are out there. We just have to help them find them, right? We just got to find those kids and help our kids find those kids and those adults. And we also want to know who might make it harder on our kids. Is there a teacher that there's no way we're winning this teacher over? It's just not going to work. So we have to give up on math for the year or whatever. Or is there a kid that's just out to get your kid? And how do we help avoid that kid? How do we help them get past that kid? And then who might your kid need to apologize to? That's come up a few times. It's a thing. There's nothing wrong with saying you're sorry and owning what you did. Other options to improve the kid's rep. Is it better to just rebrand themselves by finding new friends and activities? Right? Like if the theater troupe, if the theater club at school is a mess and your child is dead to them, like maybe they just don't do theater anymore. Maybe they're going to have to either practice that passion of theirs in a different place, like after school clubs or something, or community theater, or maybe they just go do something else. They join student council or something, right? Sometimes just a new environment can help your kid reset themselves. As parents, we have to coach them through, like, let's pay attention to where things went wrong last time and rebrand accordingly. But that's a choice. Will their reputation precede them? If so, what are we going to do about that? How are we going to navigate that? Will these problems be repeated due to a lack of skills? Does your kid stink at reading the room? If so, we got to teach them how to read the room. We have to like go places and have them look around and make guesses about what's happening in that situation. So they practice it. And how can your kid learn the skills that they're missing? It might be an ADHD coach. It might be a social skills group. There's lots of different ways to do that. Maybe you're just going to find really great like webinars on Attitude Magazine. I don't know. Teachers in the audience, here's some stuff you can do to help turn around a student's negative reputation. First off, your role cannot be overplayed. It's huge. Because you set the tone for how the other students see the kids in your classroom. If there's that one kid that drives you bananas and everybody knows about it, they might not like that kid or they might like that kid. It depends on how well you're able to handle the fact that the kid drives you bananas, right? If you've got a great relationship with that kid and you just joke around with them about how they drive you bananas, the other kids are going to like that kid. But if you're coming down hard on her and you're really kind of rough with her and you're like, stop doing this thing, now the other kids are looking at that girl like she's a problem, and that damages her relationship and her reputation with them. And if a kid is trying to rebrand themselves, you can be supportive and positive in your interactions with them, right? And in how you portray them to other students and staff, especially if they've made real changes. If they've made real changes, mention it. Like, say that in front of the class. The whole class knows that Mandy called out all the time first semester, but they might not realize she hasn't called out at all during second semester. You can make a deal out of that. You can say, hey, you know what, Mandy? You haven't called out in like 2 months. I'm really impressed with all the work you've done to do that less. Good job. Say that in front of the whole class. It's new information, but it's not mean information. Other stuff teachers can do. You can help kids find their people. Help the outcast kids find the clubs and activities that would best suit them. Right? There's got to be like a board game club at your school, or an art club, or a Dungeons and Dragons club. Those kids are going to maybe find their people in those clubs. Maybe they don't need to be in student council and playing football, you know? Maybe you could even run an after-school club in a niche or geeky area that will help those students find people. When I taught, I ran a club. I forgot the name of the book? The vampire book with Bella. Anybody help me out, guys? That book that was popular like 10 years ago or whatever. I ran a club based on that book. I didn't want to read the book, but I read the book, and I had a club about that book for one girl who needed friends, and she liked that book, and I knew the other girls liked it too because it was popular at the time. I ran a whole book club for like 2 months about this book because it was a monster. Twilight, that's the one. And it helped her make friends. It helped her connect to her peers. Maybe you do that, even for one kid. I understand teachers do that sometimes. And if you teach students that you think could hit it off, but they're in different classes, maybe you let them know that each other exists. Maybe you encourage them both to join the same club or something so they can find one another. We also want to remember that teens can reduce their emotional outbursts. We want to have some strategies there too. So emotional outbursts are usually the result of anxiety. So we're really looking at managing anxiety when we're trying to find out how to reduce emotional outbursts. One, they got to take care of the physical health. Make sure your kid is getting enough sleep. They're eating healthy meals. They fit movement and exercise into their day somewhere. They can reduce their stress by meeting their obligations, right? They need to get those assignments and responsibilities done. Even if they do a crummy job, it'll still be less stressful for them in the long run because it's not hanging over their head. So encourage your kids that done is better than perfect. You don't need to get an A, you just need to get it done, right? So that it's not hanging over your head and making you feel anxious and increasing the likelihood that you're going to have an outburst and get aggravated with your teacher or snap at your classmate. We also want to develop appropriate strategies to help your kid de-escalate their emotions in the moment. that might be 5 things that are blue, right? Name 5 things that are blue. Or the classic 5 things I can see, 4 things I can touch, 3 things I can hear, 2 things I can smell, 1 thing I can taste, right? Like kind of getting us grounded into our senses and into our bodies so that we can move past some of this anxiety. Some kids, even doing math problems can help them de-escalate because it moves us from the amygdala, which is where anxiety tends to live, to the prefrontal cortex, where careful thought and more balanced emotions tend to live. We also, when it comes to navigating these emotional outbursts, we want to create a plan with school staff so that your kid can take a break when they need one, but make sure they don't overuse it, right? That should be in the 504 of the IEP. It probably is, but it might not be getting utilized as effectively as it could be. Or it might be looked at as a bad thing, which is silly, but it happens. If you get the impression that teachers think it's dumb or inconvenient, you need to have a real conversation with that teacher about how, I understand that it might be a little disruptive for you when my kid leaves your class, but it's going to be more disruptive if my kid stays. And I understand that you think my kid is missing important learning in your classroom, but they're missing it anyway if they're upset. They're not learning if they're upset, and they're better off going somewhere else for 5 minutes and coming back so they can learn than being upset for 30 minutes and missing everything. Teachers don't always think that way. We also want to find places at school that feel safe and help the kid de-escalate. That might be the library, that might be the nurse's office, that might be the main office, that might be the lobby. There could be a courtyard somewhere that they can sit in. Or it might be one specific teacher's room. I don't know, but let's try to find what those places are and see if they're available and when they can be used. And then we want to connect our kids to a safe, supportive adult or more, and maybe even peers who can help them to de-escalate and can talk to them about what's going on. Guidance counselor, nurse, teacher, librarian, whatever makes sense. The last few steps the teens can take to reduce those emotional outbursts, they want to develop social skills like reading the room, which I'm sure we'll talk about in the Q&A, so they can better meet the expectations of the teacher, of the building, of the school, of the class. They want to learn coping strategies to help them de-escalate in the moment, right? School counselors have tons of these, and they love to share them. School counselors are dying to teach kids how to manage their anxiety. Every school counselor I've ever met, it's like, of course I want to teach you that. I just want to help, right? And then also you want to make sure that your kids, or if you're listening, pursue interests in or out of school that help you develop skills so that you have something to feel confident about. So you have something to hang your hat on, right? So that you can lean into that stuff when you're feeling less than. When you feel like you're not good enough, you got to have something that you can lean into that reminds you that you are good enough. That might be art. That might be rock climbing. That might be singing. I don't really care what it is, but we got to find it so that we can leverage it at least in our own heads. And if not, maybe even with our peers, right? If your kid is an amazing mimic and could be a voice actor, that might be something to play with their peers at lunch or something. And all of a sudden everybody's like, wow, you sound just like Mickey Mouse, or, oh my God, you sound just like Bob from Bob's Burgers. Phenomenal. Cool. Let's figure out what those skills are and how are they appropriate to share. And with that, we'll roll into questions.
Wow. Thank you so much, Brendan. We have a lot of questions to get to. I will quickly thank Brain Balance once more for sponsoring this webinar. And, I'm going to do my best not to cry when I ask these questions because they're heartbreaking. Look at me. I'm already crying. As a mother, you can see the pain that we all feel when our children are excluded. And I'm sorry to get emotional, but it is so hard when we feel somewhat powerless in this. So thank you for giving us strategies and giving us power. And I will start out with it.
Before we jump into the Q&A, I just want to say something. This entire presentation was like a 10,000 foot view, kind of by necessity, because things are so specific that it doesn't make sense for me to be like this specific thing. So I'm honestly relying on the Q&A to really illuminate a lot of what I just talked about. So if you came through this and you're like, I don't really feel like I get it, stick around for the Q&A. Don't run away, because a lot of the higher picture stuff is going to get details filled in as the questions come up.
I hope so. If I've done my job here, we'll get in there. So I'm going to start with, there were two questions that came in and really struck me with their similarities. One, parent of a sophomore, another a junior in high school. That's, grades 10 and 11 for those who are maybe overseas. They described their children as one as interesting and interested, and the other one as kind and funny. And both kids are facing these challenges that one says she seems to make friends and then they drop her. They decide they don't like her, or that she doesn't have social status. And we don't know, like we can't see what's going on. But she's lonely. And the other one wrote in to say, we don't see what's going on in school and in sports, but we know that the phone isn't ringing for him. Mm-hmm. How can we get a pulse on what these lagging social skills are, and help these kids who desperately want friends and they just feel like they're being, ignored or turned away?
Here's like the conundrum, right? Is I want this information, but I also don't want this information. That's what a lot of parents land in. Because you can contact I would recommend the parents, not the kids, but you can contact the parents of those friends that dropped your daughter and ask them what happened, and say like, what happened? Because I don't understand. That's a hard thing to do, because it means you're going to have to look at what happened, right? There's going to be pain in there. There's going to be bad news in there. But it's a situation where if we don't get the bad news, we can't grow beyond the bad news, because we're just stuck. We don't have enough knowledge to move forward. So you're totally allowed to do a little research and do a little fact finding and see if people will tell you. And they might not. That's possible too. The parents might not know. And you might not have the kind of relationship with those parents that you can say, could you ask your daughter to find out so that I can know? I really want to help my daughter navigate this. So there's that. And in terms of the phone not ringing, sometimes that, I'm gonna be a little Pollyanna-ish on this one, because I understand the pain and the hurt. But you could push your kid to make those calls instead of receiving them, they can deliver them, right? That's a choice. And that might be where it needs to start. That could be what's up. And eventually, hopefully the phone starts ringing. And also talk to your kid about whether or not your impressions are accurate on the phone not ringing piece, because it's possible you're stuck in the 80s and you're like, yeah, the phone should be ringing, and your kid might be getting text messages and might be communicating via video game interactions and stuff. They might have a more robust social life than you think, but you're kind of expecting them to be talking on the phone more, and that's not what's going on. Or you might be using that as a metaphor, broadly speaking. I don't know. But that's in here too, is kids communicate differently than we did. And so you might find that your kid has more connections than you realize. Another part of all this that I just want to touch on, it's sort of next to what's going on, is introversion and extroversion. That's playing a role in some parents' perspectives. I know it's playing a role in my perspective. You might not realize this about me. This might come as a shock, but I'm an extrovert. I'm a big extrovert. One of my sons is a wicked introvert. And I'm like, dude, just talk to people. Why aren't you talking to people? He doesn't want to. He's not interested in that. He's got enough. He has enough friends. He has enough social connection. He doesn't feel the need to talk to kids a lot. And I've had to come to terms with that. He's not lonely. He's just alone more than I was when I was a kid. Or he's alone as much as I was when I was a kid, and I was lonely, but he's not. So that could play a role here too, right? Some of our neurodiverse kids are just, they kind of dig what's going on in their own head, and they don't need other people to mess that up on them. But I don't mean that in terms of they're afraid to share what's going on in their heads because they're going to get ostracized or vilified or something. That's not what I mean. I mean, some kids are just introverted. Extroverts will eat the whole cake of people, and an introvert is happy with a slice of that cake. So for what that's worth, I wanted to throw that out there before we go too much deeper.
Okay. That's helpful to keep in mind. So I do have a follow-up question. Someone said, okay, suppose that we do sort of get some intel to figure out what the challenges are and how other kids are feeling about our child. How can we broach this topic in a supportive and positive way? How can we start this conversation with our child without perhaps sparking some shame and embarrassment?
I would ask them questions. Hey, how's it going? How you doing? What happened to Sally, Jesse, and Raphael? How come you're not hanging out with them anymore? Where'd they go? That kind of stuff, right? Like non-judgmental, just where are you going? How you feeling about that? I'm really sorry that your friends aren't coming around as much. What's going on? How do you feel about that? Do you want to try something different? Go find people in another way. And then if they share stuff that's hard, right? If they're like, well, they just won't talk to me anymore, and they're crying and upset and all this kind of thing, or even if they're not that upset, they're just like, well, they share something that would reasonably kind of pique your concern, right? Oh, that's a thing I would worry about. Then later on, you're like, hey, you know what? I'm really kind of concerned about what you said with regard to the situation. And I talked to Sally's mom just to see what was up and what Sally's view was. And this is what she told. Can I tell you what she told me? Is it okay if I let you know? Your kid is probably going to be like, I can't believe you talked to Sally's mom, right? But if you say, do you mind if I talk to Sally's mom? Your kid's going to be like, don't do that. And then you're stuck, right? So instead, this is a situation where forgiveness is easier than permission. Before I even talk to Sally's mom, I would try to have a conversation with my kid that's going to hopefully give me cause to want to talk to Sally's mom, even though I already want to. Like, I'm looking for an excuse, right? And then I talk to Sally's mom and I circle back later, and I have as gentle and as patient as a conversation as I can about it. And I might even say to my kid, and I certainly want to have this mentality of what I don't want to, and this is everything with your kid. This model is for everything. What we want to avoid is you're sitting on one side of the table, your kid is sitting on the other side of the table, and the problem is in the middle between the two of you, metaphorically speaking. What we want is you and your kid are sitting on the same side of the table, and you're a team, and the problem is on the other side of the table, and you're trying to figure it out together. That's the way we want to try to approach these things. And it's entirely possible that in this specific scenario, that's a hard thing to pull off. But make it really clear you're not disappointed in them. You're not upset with them. It's hard. They're really vulnerable with these conversations. They're really vulnerable with all of these social experiences. And it's critical that we recognize that when we talk to them about it, because we are not as vulnerable. We're not as close to it. So it's easy for us to be like, go do this, right? And they're not able to go do that because it's too soft and squishy for them.
Right. Right.
I feel like my answers are kind of vague, and I apologize for that. This is like, if I have something really specific, I can drill down deep, but it takes a while. So I'm trying to like give answers that are vague enough that it's useful for everybody, but specific enough that I'm kind of answering the question, if that makes sense.
No, it's really, every child is different, every scenario, every school, every group of friends. I mean, there's no, there is no easy answer. If there were, why we wouldn't be here. So, but here's a bit of a more specific one. And I've heard this from a couple of people here today, that their child, these typically is in high school, basically finds solidarity in the outcasts, or as one person said, the bad boys club. And these are the kids who are kind of maybe at the fringe. And they're worried that they're basically picking up some bad behaviors, bad influences. They can understand the impulse that they are more accepted by this bad boys club, but they're worried about where it might lead in terms of behavior, things like, drug and alcohol use, that sort of stuff that happens in high school.
Okay. I'm going to start with a story of hope, and then I'll dig into that more. I hung out with the bad kids when I was in school because it was easier and they were more likely to accept me. And I was the good influence on the bad kids. So that can happen. I literally had a buddy of mine quit heroin by hanging out with me in high school, senior year of high school. All of a sudden I'm hanging out with this kid every day for like a month and a half. It's like, I'm seeing a lot of that guy. I found out when we were in our 30s, like decades later. He was like, oh yeah, that's because I was quitting heroin. And I was like, what? So maybe your kid is the good influence. Who knows? That said, if you're concerned about these kids having a bad influence on your kid, talk to your kid, right? Like, continually have open, clear communication with your child. Find out what they're doing. Be transparent about things. Make it safe for them to tell you that they're making bad choices so that you can help them make better choices. Not so that it's safe for them to make bad choices, but for them to tell you that it's happening so you can help them make better choices and help them develop the skills they need to avoid those more challenging choices. Also, see what you can do about helping them find a social group that is maybe less risky. Everything is a spectrum. And what often happens is we miss that. We lose sight of that. We see our kids hanging out with the kids who are on the fringe, and we're like, oh, I wish my kid was just hanging out with all the popular kids. Your kid can't hang out with the popular kids. They don't have the skills. And those popular kids, they're all drinking and doing drugs too. It's not unique to the kids on the fringe. So it doesn't matter where your kid lands socially. It's just the kids on the fringe are outcasts, and that makes it feel more risky and dangerous. But they might just be playing Dungeons and Dragons every Friday night and not doing anything illicit. You got to find out. You got to ask, right? It just feels like it's a social setting that is not one you would like, but that doesn't mean your kid doesn't like it. And also, we want to pay attention to how culture has changed, right? Dungeons and Dragons is a good example of that. It's a really popular game now, but when we were kids, only the weirdos played it. And I say that as a guy who's been playing D&D for 3 decades, and presented at the conference, the ADHD conference a couple of years back about D&D and ADHD. Another thing that is much more mainstream is marijuana. In most states, it's legal now. It's not a big deal to our kids, but it is a big deal to us. And so some of this is generational and us having to navigate that stuff as well. Is there anywhere else I should go with that?
No, I think that's really helpful. And sometimes it's the fear of the unknown, right? These just, as you said, could be new kids to you as a parent.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily make them bad. And hey, addressing it head on is usually a good idea if you can get your kids to listen to you. So I wanted to turn to a pretty common experience, and that is, I think many parents out there, if your child has ADHD, you're familiar with the concept of rejection-sensitive dysphoria, of fearing or feeling very acutely the pain of either real or perceived rejection. And we're hearing that a lot, either from kids who were bullied, or even if they weren't, they seem to carry this fear of trying new things. And the parents want to take this advice of, starting a new club or getting involved in a new sport, and the child seems almost petrified and very resistant. Can you offer some advice?
There's so many layers in this onion. It's awesome.
Yes, I'm sorry.
No, it's great. I love these questions. These are fun. I just feel like I'm going to babble forever. So first, global pandemic. We got to start there, because a lot of us spent a long time not seeing other people. And even though we were not rejected by anybody, our subconscious is kind of feeling rejected during that time. And coming out of that, plenty of people had trouble reaching out and contacting friends and knowing what to do with that because they hadn't talked in a year or whatever. So there's this like underlying small t trauma that comes with COVID, depending on how you handled it, that might be exacerbating this fear of trying something new, because during COVID, don't try anything new, right? And of risking rejection or experiencing rejection, because a lot of COVID felt like social rejection because of all the isolation that happened for so many. So that's playing a role here. I just want to point that out. Also, rejection sensitivity does go along with ADHD. A lot of that is because, we don't meet expectations like we would like to. And when we don't meet expectations, we feel like we're going to get rejected. And whether we do or we don't doesn't matter. We just feel like we're gonna. And so that builds up and builds up and builds up over time. I highly recommend that you go to Jessica McCabe's How to ADHD channel on YouTube and find the rejection sensitivity videos. Go to Attitude and find the rejection sensitivity articles, and I'm sure there's been webinars on it and stuff, and share those things with your kids, whichever of those is going to be the medium that will be best for them, so that they can learn about it. Because if they don't know that this is a thing that exists, they can't play the head game of, is this a really strong rejection or am I overreacting to it? Is this something am I giving this the correct amount of emotional weight? If they don't know that they could play that game, they're not going to, and they're going to overestimate the amount of emotional weight. Also, another piece of this is not necessarily rejection sensitivity, but risk of failure and hesitancy to risk failure. Maybe you just start asking your kid about what they failed at every day, and when they tell you, you cheer them on about it. That's really awesome that you did that thing and took that risk and risked failure, because failure is important. Failure is critical to growth and to progress. And right now, your kids are in middle school and high school, and school does not have that perspective. There are schools that espouse that and they try to make it part of their school environment and culture. But the nature of school, the structure of school, is that failure is not good, because when you fail a test or don't turn in an assignment, you are punished for it. You have to make up that test by staying after school. You still have to do that assignment, but you also have this other assignment that you have to do at the same time. And now you're doing twice as much work. School can't wait for you to fix the problem and catch up, because it has to keep moving, because they only have 180 days. And what they are expected to cover in the curriculum frameworks requires more than 180 days for most of the subjects, because I've read 2/3 of them. It's just part of the nature of school, is there's this breakneck pace and there's no forgiveness. Whereas in the real world, there is forgiveness and you are allowed to fail and bounce back. So some of this is the nature of how school works. But as parents, we can let them live in a different environment when they're home, and allow for more room for failure and struggle. And we can get over it. We don't need to be like, oh my God, you got a B-, that's the worst. We can just be like, cool. What'd you mess up on in this essay? Great, because you've been working on like changing your introductory sentences and you got marked down for that. But I'm glad you were messing with it. Awesome. That let them fail and encourage them to fail. I think that's in here too.
Yeah. We have a saying in our house: a failure is not a failure if you learn something from it.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I am the bearer of bad news, and that is that we are running up against our time today. We had so many great questions, and as you heard earlier, ones that really touched me at my heart. And I hope that I know that we can do more on this topic of building social skills. And I know, Brendan, that we will have you back for more. This was incredibly helpful and very uplifting. And I invite those of you who are listening and do have teens and tweens, I want you to make sure you know about our webinar next week, which is My Teen with ADHD Lacks All Motivation: How to Build Executive Function Skills and Drive. And that's with Dr. Maggie Sibley. So we hope you can join us for that. But for now, I would just want to extend our heartfelt thanks to Brendan for leading this really, really helpful webinar, and for everyone who joined and contributed your insight and your questions. Thank you so much for joining us today.